Okay, so this is the how-to guide for our 6-month DIY service kit. So every 6 months you need to change your cap tops and your dampers, and just inspect the wiper blade. It may not need to be changed, but we're still going to go through it in this video, so that you know how to do it. So your cap top will be in a box, and that should be inside of a plastic bag. Now on the bottom there's two little barb fittings. Now a good thing to do is to actually put clamps inside there so the tube can't pop off, especially if they've been cut a few times and start to get a little bit tight. So we are going to, I need a different screwdriver. Let's start from there. So we're just going to undo these 4 screws so we can take the bottom part of the cap top off. And you can also probably cut out the bits where I just take ages to do things, just so the video's not
forever long.
Yeah. Like this bit we probably do. So when you've got all 4 screws out, the spring will push it apart. So just keep them separate. So what we're going to end up doing is putting the tubes in, and then that allows us to have more access to put the clamps on. If you don't have clamps, little zip ties will work fine as well. Just buy them from Bunnings or Super Cheap Auto. Just to keep the lines on there, stop them from coming off. So we're just going to move the head carriage across so we have access to the cap tops. So just push the left button once, it'll drop the capping station, and then we'll hold it down, it'll slide across. And now we've just got 4 screws that we need to undo to get the cap top out. Okay, now you can pull your cap top out and just find how much slack you've got. Now this one, you can see it's already been clamped once. So to get those tubes off, I just like to use a pair of side cutters and just cut them. Okay, and then that cap top can just go in the bin. So you want to slip this over the tubes first. If you don't, then you're not going to be able to get them on afterwards. And you're also going to want to put your clamps over. If you're using zip ties, then you don't need to, obviously, because they're all open. Then you can just push them over the fitting, like so. Okay. If you're using the clamp, needle nose pliers. To put them on like that. So when you've got both of them on, I like to spin them around, just so you've got a bit more room. So one at the top, one at the bottom. Okay. Then you just want to get your spring back in position. There is a place for it to go, so just make sure it sits back in its home. Then you have to push it together. I'm going to spin that around. Okay. And then all you want to do is just put your screws back in. So once you've got that back on, simply push the tubes back down. And then find position. it'll just slot in and be loose, and then you just want to put all of those screws back in. So once you put your cap top in, always just double check that it's going to push down, and then when you fill it up with moisturizer, the liquid stays in the top and doesn't just disappear. If that happens, then that means that one of your tubes has likely come off, and you'll have to undo it and refit it. So just make sure it stays up the top and doesn't just drain. So now we're going to change the wiper blade. A good idea before you do this is to just take a video of how your machine does its clean cycle, and pay particular attention as to how the wiper blade wipes and how much pressure there is, because you want to get that into a similar spot. It is a bit of a manual adjustment, but you can go into the back end of the software and change it, but for you guys it'll be a manual change. So you can always just take a bit of a measurement from the bottom of that to the top of there, just to make sure when you put the new blade in it's about the same height. You just don't want it to wipe too hard, or obviously not at all. It's just to get rid of the excess ink, so it doesn't need to be very excessive at all. Now, depending on the machine that you have, you may have one where it's split. You can just cut these. So on this blade, there are little marks here so that you can cut them. So we'll just have a look at where our bolts are going to line up. We'll just find a good, that looks like it's about right there. So I'm just going to cut it off here. Scissors will do just a good job. So depending on which one you have, it's just a few screws. Some of them have some extra plates that hold it in. So it's always a good idea to take the opportunity to give things a clean when they're apart, just to get rid of any of the build-up of dried ink that could be on there. Now there is a top and a bottom, so just make sure that's the top, and that's the part that's actually going to be doing the wiping, so make sure you put it in the correct way around. So we just want to marry this up so we've got our holes lining up on the back, and then you just do the reverse. Now it's loose, so you can put it in the right spot. So like I said earlier, if you take a measurement, you'll be able to find where you need to be. And it's also really important to make sure that it's even on the left and the right, and that it's not on a big tilt. Otherwise it'll wipe some of the heads and then not the others. So always just have a good look to make sure it's in there nice and straight as well when you're done. And then put the printer through a clean cycle, double check that it wipes properly, do a nozzle test, and just ensure that all of the heads are firing after they have been wiped. So you may not need to change your wiper blade every 6 months. Just have a look at the edge and just make sure it's not frayed or starting to fall apart. If it's still in good condition, I would just leave it. You might get 12 or 18 months out of one of them. It depends on how often you clean, really. So if you can leave it, I would leave it, and just worry about your cap tops and dampers at the 6-month service. So I'm also going to show you how to change an inline filter. So you can either use the discs, or I have a long filter. On the long filter it gives you a directional arrow for the flow, and then on the smaller disc ones it will say inlet on the top, just engraved into it. Just make sure you have that in the correct orientation so the ink can flow through the filter properly. Now I have turned the power off so that the ink circulation isn't trying to run while we're doing this. It's always a good idea. You can either turn the power off or just turn the motor off, disconnect it while you're doing it. So you just want to clamp the lines either side of the filter. That way when you cut it off it's not going to make a big mess. So a little bit of ink will come out. And then give yourself just a little bit extra. Actually no, what am I saying? Just edit that. So cut this one off too. If you put your finger over one end, it will hopefully not leak everywhere. Okay, especially important on the big filters that have got a lot more ink in them. And then just put that in the bin. So on these filters they have a lure lock design, so on the top put that on, and I like to get pliers. I find finger tight isn't quite enough. It is just a plastic fitting, so just be careful you don't overdo it, otherwise you will crack the plastic. I just like to use 2 fingers and just turn until it slips. Once it starts slipping, that's enough. Okay. If you haven't tightened it enough, you'll see ink go into the threads when you introduce ink into the filter, and then you'll know you need to tighten it a little bit more before it starts just coming out and leaking all over the floor. Then we can have it in this flow direction. So I put the top on. I will add a clamp there just because it does have the recirculating system pulling ink through. So it's always a good idea to put a clamp on. Okay. Again, you can use cable ties if you don't have any of those clamps. Now, a good idea is you can either keep one of these fittings from your other filter. It's probably a good idea. But what you want to do is you want to prime that filter. So don't connect it straight away to the full system because it's going to be full of air. And you can create basically an airlock or just a big air pocket that is extremely difficult to get out through the dampers. So if you just connect a fitting and a bit of tube, then all we're going to do is basically pull ink through. I'm going to unclamp this one. Pull the ink through, there we go. So that'll start to fill the filter, okay? These filters only ever really sit a third of the way, max half, and that is perfectly fine, okay? Now we're just going to reclamp that line, okay? Now depending on how flexible the tube is, you might be able to just pull it off. Otherwise, that's why I'm saying use a spare fitting so you can just undo it. Otherwise then you're going to try and cut it off. Yep. So I'm just going to slip this over. Now it's a good idea to always fit these first, because if you don't and you fit them to the tube first, when you go and tighten it up, you're going to twist the ink line, and that can shorten the lifespan of the line by creating more tension on the rubber and potentially split it at some point. So always tighten them up first and then put them on. And I'm just going to clamp this bottom one as well. Okay. Then I can undo them. There will still be a little bit of air in the line. So you just need a syringe, why is it not coming? Your dampers, and get that little bubble out. But it's a gravity fed system, so at some point the air will just work its way out. It might take a day of printing before you see that bubble come out, but by priming that you'll alleviate the vast majority of the issues that you'll run into when changing these filters. So it's really important to pull the ink through first before reconnecting that line, so you don't have a massive pocket of air trying to get out through the system. This is going to be a video on how to change a damper. So all you'll need is some lint-free cloths, your clamping scissors, a syringe, and a sharp pair of scissors, and of course the damper that you're going to swap over to. Now before I start, I like to put lint-free cloths down the sides just to cover the electrical parts of the head in case you do make a bit of a mess and have a spillage. It's just a little bit safer to do that. Another thing you can do is also turn the machine off. That way if you do make a big mess, if the machine's off, it's not going to short the head. If you happen to get ink down in here, you'll have a chance to be able to take the cables out, clean all the ink off, and then put it back in when it's dry. But it's best just to avoid mess in the first place. So before you change a damper, always have a look and see how much extra ink line you have. If it's already tight, then you may need to add a joiner like this, and then add a bit of extra ink line to reach the damper. So always make sure you do that before you go cutting it off. You don't want to be in a position where you've cut it and now it's too short and you can't actually get the damper back into the head, because then you won't be able to print. So I'm just going to find one that's a good one over here. So I'm just going to clamp it. Okay. So then that way when I cut it off, it's not going to spill ink everywhere, and your dampers just pull out. Okay. Now it's a good idea just to cover the end of the damper, okay, before you cut it off, just so the ink doesn't leak everywhere. going to cut it off like that and just put it in the bin. I'm just going to wipe that off of my hands. Wipe that off here. Okay, this is a new damper. Now, depending on your setup, you may have a short stocky damper or a long one like this. If you have a short one, you won't have one of these brackets, so it doesn't really matter which way around you put the damper in. But if you have these, it's important that you have it facing the right direction, otherwise it won't actually go in. So just do a test to make sure it's going to slot in before you add your incline. Okay, and every time you bump it, it may spray a little bit, but just clean that off. Now, depending on the thickness of your incline, it may be easier to fit it on. These ones are quite thin, so if you do have thin ones, just take your time and just massage it down. Okay. If you are finding it slippery because you have a bit of ink on your hands, just grab a lint-free cloth and just use that for a little bit of extra grip. Okay. Just keep massaging it down until it's all the way on there, so it's all the way down the bottom. Your damper will have two, it's a double barb, so just make sure you're over both of those. Okay. Now you can unclamp. Okay. So your damper acts as a little vacuum, so it's not just going to, ink's just not going to pour straight out if the damper is functioning correctly. If the damper is damaged, then ink will come straight out. Now at this point, you want to grab the syringe and you want to put it in the bottom like so. It doesn't go inside the damper, it just sits at the bottom and just creates a seal. Okay. Now whenever you're handling a damper, always hold it by the sides. You don't want to be touching this area with the film. If you do, especially if it's full of ink and you touch the damper here where the diaphragm is, ink will pour out because you've disrupted the vacuum. Just hold it on the sides in one hand, put that in, wrap 1 or 2 fingers around the syringe, and then you'll be able to pull the ink through. Okay, and all you're doing is just priming the damper and getting air out of it. Just pull it through till we've got a nice flow. Fill the syringe up probably halfway if you've got this is a 20mm syringe. You might have a 10mm. I would fill the 10mm, and if you've got one of the really big ones, only up to 10. That's all you really need to do. Okay, and then it should just push in. Okay.